This is Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and just a few feet away, hidden underground, is a network of streets.
Morning. So this morning I am feeling pretty lucky. We're on the Royal Mile and we're about to go and see a street hidden underneath a city. You're not normally allowed to film down here, so quite excited.
There's evidence of people living on top of the castle rock back as far as the Iron Age, and you never know what's buried underneath all this history. Just next to the city chambers is a doorway leading to Mary King's Close, an abandoned 17th century street. But it wasn't always called Mary King's Close, and it's not just one street, it's a network.
This is the actual close itself. It's pretty tight.
In Scotland, a close is a tight street or passageway. Edinburgh has loads of them, running at regular intervals off the Royal Mile. Mary King's Close ran along here, but in 1753 they built the Royal Exchange, and part of the street was destroyed and buried.
You have to think about this place not as obviously being underground as it is now. Above me would have been sky, and around me would have been market stalls and loads of people rushing about. You can still see that in some of the closes today in Edinburgh, especially at rush hour. You see people rushing up and down to the train station, and they're very much still a part of day-to-day life. Real Mary King's Close experience is actually made up of more than one close. There are actually 4 different closes.
But who was Mary King? And why did she have her own close?
The closes were generally named after notable people. So Mary King being notable in that era, she was a burgess of the borough of Edinburgh, and that meant that she had voting rights, which would have been unusual in those days. She seems to have been quite a character. We don't know an awful lot about her, but we do know that she was born around the end of the 16th century and that she was a merchant. She would have had stalls on the high street selling her wares. So this is a typical house on Mary King's Close. You'll notice behind me it's got a vaulted ceiling. That wouldn't have originally been there, it would normally have been flatter. There is a bit of a window over there. You can see that most of the light would actually come from over here. This little lamp behind me, which would have been filled with some kind of oil. And the facilities in the middle of the room are a little bit grim. That was basically your toilet. And what you would have done back in the day is thrown it out into the street. So you'd have taken that bucket and out here, you'd have shouted, "Gardez-le," kind of a corruption of the French, "watch out for the water," and thrown it down the street. Lovely. This is a byre, a place where animals would have been kept. The thing about these closes and streets in Edinburgh in general was that animals lived pretty close by. If you wanted milk, it needed to be somewhere you could get to it easily, and that's why you would have found animals around here as well. Plus, we're quite close to Flesh Market Close. The Flesh Market would have been where the butchers worked, or fleshers as they were known back in the day. And keeping the animals close by meant that they could get quite quickly to the butchers. Maybe not so good for them. This is the house of the Craig family. Mr. Craig was a gravedigger during the time of the Black Death, or the Plague, or the Foul Pestilence as it was known round here. Mr. Craig, being a gravedigger, would have brought the plague back to his house, and his entire family then caught it. There were 2 different types of plague. There was bubonic plague and pneumonic plague. They were known as the Black Death. In pneumonic plague, you inhale it through your lungs, which causes coughing, then internal bleeding.
Bubonic plague generally entered through the skin, usually from a bite from a flea carried by a rat. Lymph nodes near the bite would swell up into buboes and sometimes burst.
And your tongue, your fingers and extremities will turn black through gangrene, hence Black Death. If you knew you had the plague in your house, you had to let people know, and the way you did that was by hanging a white piece of rag outside your window. Seems like a pretty grim time to have been alive. After you died of the plague or recovered from the plague, people would come in and clean it out, and they were known as the foul clangers or the foul cleaners. Obviously because they cleaned up after the foul pestilence, which I kind of like as a name. Sounds a bit better than the Black Death or the Plague. We don't know if this is actually the house that the Craigs lived in. We do know they existed. The reason this is called the real Mary King's Close is because these are all real people. This is George Ray. Dr. George Ray. He is the plague doctor, and he might look spooky, but this man's a hero. He was appointed in June 1645 as Edinburgh's plague doctor because the previous plague doctor had died of, you guessed it, the plague. And his outfit might look quite kind of scary, but there's reason behind it. It was believed that at the time that the plague was spread by miasmas, foul-smelling spirits. Obviously, we didn't understand germs or disease at that point in time. And this outfit looks quite a lot like a raven. It's got a kind of a scary beak on it. Ravens were considered sacred birds, and it was believed that by having this beak, you could scare off the miasmata or the miasmas. Inside the beak would have been herbs to get rid of the foul smells and again scare off the miasmas. You'll notice that he has this cane with him, and he used the cane, supposedly, to take people's pulses. He obviously wasn't about to touch anybody without the cane. He's covered from head to foot in waxed leather. So his mask and this entire outfit and his gloves and everything waxed leather, apart from the actual bits of glass that cover his eyes. All of which would have protected him from the germs. It's just, he thought it was protecting him from miasmas. Dr. Ray wanted to charge the city quite a healthy amount for his services, and fair enough, to be honest. He was taking a big risk. The plague had something like a 95% death rate. So he asked the council for what he considered to be a king's wage, £100 a month. And the city council, probably thinking he wouldn't last that long, agreed. After the outbreak, he tried to get the money out of them, and it took him something like 10 years. And some historians think he never actually got it before he died. If you were lucky enough to survive the plague, and you would have had to have been very lucky, then you would have been dispatched to the outside of the city to live in a tent, a lot like this one, which would have been quite nice compared to the slums that people were living in back in the day. But then I think you probably deserved it if you'd survived the plague. So this is a 17th century house. It's pretty cool. There's lots of interesting stuff in here. For example, overhead you can see this is old style lath and plaster. You'll see lath and plaster in Edinburgh flats up until about the Victorian era. But this is horsehair plaster. You can sort of see the horsehair in there. It's really interesting to see this. But this is 17th century plaster, which is kind of mad. The other interesting bit in here is block printing. You can see this kind of floral pattern behind me, which would have been made in the 17th century just to try and make it look a little bit posher. But that's it's a really cool pattern. You can see in here, behind me, you can see there's an original door, which is a kind of an archway. And then you can see over there, there's a window that's been blocked off. There's a big kind of open fireplace under here. You can see that this was obviously a kitchen because there's an actual milling stone here. Pretty cool. Probably the bit of the close that is the most kind of evocative, I would say. In a corner of the 17th century house, this is Annie's room. And the reason for the toys behind me is Annie. She's been named Annie. In the 1990s, a Japanese psychic, Aiko Gibo, toured Mary King's Close. And she came in here and she said she felt a presence, a distressed child who had lost her family and wanted her doll. So Aiko went out and bought a Barbie doll and brought it down here. Ever since, other people have brought toys for Annie and left them here. The original Barbie doll actually went missing, and there was a call to whoever had taken it to bring it back. It was never recovered, but as we can see, and he's still got quite a collection behind me. And we'll just add Paddington. This room here behind me, this place was actually used as a World War II air raid shelter. And you can obviously see the posters on the wall, the old kind of wireless. It was never actually used because Edinburgh was never bombed. But you can still see sort of relative bits of history associated with World War II. In fact, the ventilation system is from World War II, which is why it feels quite warm down here. And what it really reminds me of is a nuclear bunker I've been in. A lot of the kind of the feel of the air is quite similar. This is the house of the last resident of Mary King's Close, Andrew Chesney, who was evicted in 1897 when this was bought by statutory purchase, because really they didn't want people living underground. We can't go in because the wallpaper has arsenic in it, so for health and safety reasons that would be a really bad idea. This is Andrew Chesney's workshop. He was a saw maker. You don't generally think about the people that make the saws, generally just the people that use the saws to make other things. It's really, really dark in there, and it's quite kind of atmospheric. And the thing that apparently Mr. Chesney was very proud of was his thunderbox, his wooden toilet at the far end of the hall there. Quite something.
The whole place is quite something. And if you get the chance to see it, if you're in Edinburgh, if you live in Edinburgh, I highly recommend stopping by. A massive thank you to everyone at the real Mary King's Close for letting me film there. You'll find a link below in the description.